Hi everyone, I'm Tim Woods, one of Hernando's nephews, and all of my family, my wife Nancy and our children Christine and Brian, love and miss Papatino greatly. I'm glad to be able to talk today to bring you one nephew's own happy memories of a great, fun, caring, loving, laughing uncle. And I know all of you out there looking at this have your own favorite stories of how Papatino touched your life, and I hope that you're going to share those memories with my cousins, either today or sometime soon. On behalf of Mayor Dan, Lydia, and their families, I know they were all grateful for those who gathered together at Mass at St. Joan of Arc as we prayerfully celebrated Hernando's life. Your prayers over the weeks of Hernando's last few on this earth, as well as all the messages of support on Facebook and elsewhere, were a great, great comfort to them. And I'm also very, very grateful and honored that Lydia, Mayor, and Dan asked me to talk about their dad in this manner. Monsignor Turek over at St. Joan of Arc was so kind for bringing Holy Communion to Hernando on Fridays, and especially for him coming to the house on Oletha Avenue on the last Saturday of his life to sacramentally prepare him for his journey home. The Mass was wonderful. The music ministries were terrific. The kid servers were great. All of us really just had a joyful Mass in remembrance of Papatino because of the hospitality at St. Joan of Arc. So thanks to all of them. How can I begin to characterize a life lived so well over 90 plus years? When I think of Papatino, I imagine Peter Pan with a Honduran accent, adorned in his later years with a bushy mustache and a bristly beard, and always, always, always a sparkle in his eye. He was a man who was always ready for adventure, or just as readily for a siesta. Now, I picture this good man often through the prism of my youth. Ours was an extended family that seemingly gathered for fun simply because the day happened to end in a Y. Aunt Rita and my mom, Jane Woods, being sisters, had little reason, if ever, to get everybody together for a fun supper and just fun being together as family. Now, being the youngest of 7 children himself, Hernando was used to having lots of loved ones around. A highlight of all of our get-togethers was all of us cousins, the Woodses, the Steeses, most of all the Florentinos, all lining up for turn after turn after turn after turn of reaching our hands backwards through our legs for Hernando to flip us over alley-oop style. Such great, great strength in those two arms. And I don't know who would squeal more with delight, us kids or Papatino, forever a kid in his heart. Cousin Dan, this is for you. I'm certain that your dad laughs heartily every day now when he watches you do that today with Sullivan and Brady and one day soon Pierce. Now, family events at Uncle Hernando and Aunt Rita's house on Oletha often included spur-of-the-moment trips, his idea, to the old White Castle over in Hampton Village for bags of belly bombers. Usually we would have to just whisper to him, Uncle Hernando, can we go get some belly bombers? Oh yeah! And we all pile into the car. I would always be amazed at how Papatino would find a way to squeeze all of these 6 to 12-year-old cousins inside one vehicle. But he'd make it happen. He introduced us to several varieties of silly no-look hand tap games or hand slap games that were always such fun to play, just simple laughter and joy, probably going back to his days in Honduras. Never once could I figure out how to defeat Uncle Hernando, my jester uncle, whose laughter would build to a crescendo, while soon enough I would just be waving the white flag of surrender. I could never beat him. Now, as all of us cousins grew into adulthood, when we were together, we would sometimes serenade my uncle with a chorus of Hernando's Hideaway from the old musical The Pajama Game. And I remember him maybe sashaying a tango a few strides across the floor toward us. I always thought he was una baiana agraciada, a graceful dancer. Cousin Dan told me not long ago how he held Papatino's hands during a nap in one of his dad's final days. And Dan said that he thought to himself, what could these hands not do? Well, Hernando's hands were happiest when they found work to be done. My mom, who was with us from Omaha for Hernando's memorial mass, remembers a time when Hernando and Aunt Rita and Grandma Steese all visited Mom and Dad up in Omaha. The Woods' house, which Mom and Dad had bought in 1977, had a back deck that was built capably enough, but it lacked those vertical balusters that go all the way around the perimeter of the deck to ensure safety. Taking one look at that upon his arrival, Hernando hurried my dad back out the door into the local home center to buy all the necessary wood and fasteners and so forth to fix that properly. He might not have even brought the luggage inside from the drive up to St. Louis before he was there hard at work. Probably my loving uncle, this ready and willing fixer-upper, never even stopped for supper until he had drilled the final baluster upright safely into place. More seriously, although I smile at that memory, I would also add that the community of St. Louisans who yearned for a solid roof over their heads benefited in one way or another from Papatino's devoted volunteering with the local Habitat for Humanity Restore. Just as many people had extra life pumped into their veins through Hernando being a loving and caring pheresis donor. Now, you might be aware that Hernando spent many years as the do-it-all handyman at St. Joan of Arc Day School. One of my current work colleagues, who was assistant principal for a time at St. Joan of Arc School, her name back then was Diane Kissel, told me how Hernando kept the school in, and I quote, tip-top condition and took on any task readily and with a smile. We had regular custodians, Diane tells me, who did the cleaning and the sweeping and all that. But for any repair work, it was Hernando we called. Once there was a plumbing problem inside the faculty lounge, and the school administration, Diane being one of the principals, was very worried about the potential cost of repairs, until Hernando came to the rescue. The kids loved him, and so did the staff. Hernando just had a joy to him. He was one of the very, very special people I remember from my time at St. Joan of Arc. Hernando, you were the best. And that's unquote. Now, we know too that Papatino handled a needle and thread expertly. How proud he was of his sewing machine collection. I remember it downstairs in the basement on Oletha. His papa, Maximiliano Florentino, was a tailor. And my mom recalls that while Hernando was stationed in Japan with the U.S. Army, he made the acquaintance of a tailor there named Mr. Nakamura, from whom Hernando learned even more nuances of that craft of tailoring. Soon enough, upon his return to the United States in 1952, Hernando readily took on tailoring and alterations for his family and relatives and friends when he had the spare time. And he was the type of man who would make the spare time. My mom told me that on the Saturday before wrong page. My mom told me in admiration, just by looking at a garment, Hernando would say, we'll take a little bit out here, or we'll put a little bit in there. It's like he just had a gift through those fingers and his vision for what his daddy had taught him and what he had learned on his own over his years as an adult. Now, I'm thinking now of that sparkle in Papatino's eye when I think back to my older brother, Mark, being with us at the memorial mass. Mark had flown up from Melbourne, Florida, where he now lives and works with his family. Mark's and Papatino's special bond included Mark often falling victim to an olive pit, having been snuck into one pocket or another of his clothing by this Honduran Peter Pan whenever we gathered together as a family. Back in 1970, as Mark prepared for a study-away opportunity in Europe, he asked Uncle to tailor some pants he intended to pack. Mark wore those pants all throughout Scotland and the rest of Europe throughout his entire journey. And only after his return to the United States did Hernando confess to Mark that he'd sewn an olive pit calling card directly into a pocket of those pants. And had Mark found them? Well, Hernando, as he did so often, pulled a fast one on my brother. I know that they laughed about it often, up to the very last time they were able to be together for Hernando's 90th birthday last July. I've heard my uncle described, maybe a little bit tongue-in-cheek, as a man of a million words with an eye roll. What that means is that he wasn't all the time very much for long conversation, especially when you would call the house on the telephone. That's fair enough. I too remember him playing hot potato whenever I would dial Flanders 12358 back in the day. He'd answer the phone, and I would greet him and tell him I loved him and how was he. Quickly, he would hand the phone off to Pika. But you should also know about my uncle that he was often the very first to greet you, the very first to welcome you warmly, with his well-chosen and well-placed sense of timing with his words. My wife Nancy and Mark's wife Cara both would tell you that it was Hernando who, at two separate landmark family events for the Woodses, sifted through all the great aunts and great uncles and second cousins and this massive humanity to greet each of them at those two particular times. He saw a need to welcome into the family others who looked like total strangers or were meeting all of the Woodses' extended family for the first time. He had that vision. Now, my mom says that he always made you feel welcome in his house. And I think it says a great deal about Hernando's capacity to love, that he embraced having Aunt Rita's mother, our beloved Grandma Steese, live with them for so many years, long after he had moved away from his own beloved mother, Eloisa Oyana, back home in the Trinidad region of Honduras. I know that Papatino was delighted that we gathered together at St. Joan of Arc for his memorial mass. After all, that was his parish home for nearly a half century. I'll always be grateful for the privilege of spending a wonderful afternoon and early evening with Hernando and my cousins the Saturday before Hernando died. At one point, Dan and I were praying over him, and we were reciting the Our Father. And glancing over at my uncle, I saw him mouthing the words. He was fully aware, up to his very last breath, of the gift of life that God had given him, and he planned on using every opportunity that he could to praise his God coming back. I'm convinced that Hernando's faith was his greatest ally throughout all the joys and sorrows, yes, and all the ups and downs, yes, that he would have experienced over his 9 decades. His faith was always there for him. And St. Joan of Arc Church and Parish is where Hernando came so often to celebrate that faith, with Aunt Rita, Mare, Dan, and Lydia at his side. So, I'm going back to faith as I close. That same faith allows me to picture Hernando and Pika reunited after nearly 57 years on this earth as husband and wife. She has her beloved German shepherds, Vaughn and Duchess, and the other Duchess, and the other Vaughn, and the other Duchesses, and the other Vaughns, all of them at her side, while Papatino cradles Tawdry, Vagan, Twinkie, and all the other beloved Florentino animals of Mare and Michael over the years. They're all there together. Rita and Hernando are settling in for the overture to La Traviata, mirroring the first date they had after they met through their shared workplace, the old Defense Mapping Agency plant down on 2nd and Arsenal in St. Louis. I know that he preferred Pavarotti's magnificent operatic tenor, while I believe Pika favored the crooning of Frankie Lane. But they've no doubt worked out a compromise over a meal of tamales and Pika's zesty chili. I close with one thought. And this is fractured Spanish, so I hope I'm doing Papatino proper service. Papatino descansa ahora en los brazos de su amor a Dios. Hernando, rest now in the arms of your loving God. I love you, Papatino, both now and forever.